It all started in 1967 when my dad had a stroke in the front room. I was then 10 years of age. My parents bought this old cottage in 1963. The house was built in 1740. There had been no problems in the house prior to 1967. When my dad came out of the hospital, he was paralyzed down the left-hand side and was unable to speak. That's when things started to happen in the house. The first thing that happened was my parents were in bed, and suddenly all the blankets waved and rolled completely off the bed. Also, the wallpaper in the bedroom would become soaking wet for no apparent reason, then bone dry next day. As the months passed by, my father regained most of the use on his left side, but never regained his speech. Also, my father after the stroke became nasty and violent towards me. I had to put a bolt on my bedroom door, as he would wander about in the middle of the night and come in my bedroom and just stare at me sometimes, waving a fist. One night, I was in bed, and I woke up to the bed rocking on its own. I put the bedside lamp on and jumped out of bed screaming. I unbolted the door, shouting to my mother. As she entered the bedroom, the bed was still jumping on its own accord. In front of us, we both ran downstairs, and my father knew nothing as he had some sleeping tablets. We walked a while to calm down, then went back to check. It stopped by then, so I got back in bed and left the lights on. I had no choice. We did have a third bedroom, but to come and go, I had to pass through my parents' bedroom, and as an 11-year-old boy, I was scared of what my dad would do next, so I had to stop in that bedroom. One night, me and my mother were watching television. It was about 11:30 p.m. when we heard a terrible screaming coming from the small cast iron window, which led into the back garden near the television. We didn't dare speak to each other, and that stopped after about 4 minutes. The next thing I knew, the television, which was on 4 screwed legs, began to walk towards us, rocking from side to side. It only stopped when the main cord pulled tight. We were by then petrified. The screaming noise had woke my father, and he came downstairs shouting, but due to his stroke, the words were not making any sense. He ran into the back sitting room. My mother said, "Go get your dad, or he might have another stroke," so off I went. Entering the room, it was pitch black. Everything happened so fast, I didn't think about turning the light on. And then I looked at the back window, which led onto the very private, unlit garden. A gray-white figure floated past the window of the side view. It was very defined. He had a 3-cornered hat, a white beard, walking stick, and a long trench-type coat with 3 buttons on it with no legs visible. I ran out of the room, leaving my father, who was looking out of the other window, who hadn't seen anything. I ran to the other room to my mother. I was unable to speak properly to her for at least an hour. My father just wandered back to bed. In desperation, my mother contacted a medium. She said the spirit was called Jacob, who was only trying to help us through the difficult time. He had been a gardener who got killed when a horse fell on him, the medium said. Things became so bad, doors banging, strange sounds in the middle of the night, not helped by my father, who everybody was scared of. I had an older sister, and she moved out in 1968 to get away from the situation. In the end, my mother put the house up for sale in 1972. And that last night, it was terrible. My father was in bed asleep with those sleeping tablets again, so he was unaware of anything. Me and my mother was huddled up in the front room. We stayed awake all night, doors banging from under the floorboards, moaning noises. Then dawn broke at 6:30 a.m. Everything stopped and went calm. We couldn't wait to move out. After we sold it, nobody lived in it longer than 18 months, till it became empty 25 years ago. Around the time this event occurred, I was around 11 or 12. I am a female, And I guess you could say I live in your basic, small, no creepy town where everybody knows each other and nothing super creepy goes on. Although we do have some surrounding towns that are pretty sketch and full of druggies or whatnot. But anyway, here is my story. Me and my mother were visiting a neighboring town of ours, maybe 10 to 15 minutes away. We were there helping out my stepmom set up a reception for a wedding that would be held later in the week. It took place in a building called the Lions Hall, which is basically a place for get-togethers and such. Now, something you should know now is that the town we were in was one of the sketchier places, and it was in one of the worst sections. Me and my sister were outside of the building, walking around and talking, when this guy pulled up in a truck. Now my stepmom was expecting someone to help carry in a few things, although she didn't really know him. So thinking nothing of it, we just assumed it was him. So then he got out of the truck and went into the building. We could hear him talking to our stepmom. He was there for a while, but then finally came out of the building and went back into his truck. Now at this point, me and my sister were still outside walking around. We noticed he was staring at us, blankly with no real expression on his face. He sat like that for a while until me and my sister had enough and walked around to the back of the building. Then that's when he started the truck and slowly crept around the building, sort of following us. We went around and around, doing this for probably 4 minutes or so. We could tell something was seriously off, but then, just as we turned the corner to where he was gone, like poof into thin air. We never heard him drove off or anything, and that was enough for us. So we ran inside and didn't go back out for the rest of the day. We never spoke about our encounter to anyone. So as far as I know, weird sketchy truck guy, let's never meet again. A few months ago, I was staying at my friend's house. Basically, I'd gone to sleep as normal. I usually sleep perfectly, but this time, I woke up at 5:35 and felt weird. I took the blanket from my face and looked to the foot of my bed and saw 2 girls, both blonde, didn't have a face and had little blue penny dresses on. I looked at them for a good few seconds and turned back over to sleep. I told my clairvoyant friend, and she told me she's always thought I had a talent for seeing the beyond. Thank you for reading. I know this is kind of short, but I guess it was a kind of cool story. I'm living in Birmingham, and I'm thinking there has to be some haunted locations that I could go to and feel around, given the history of the city. I started doing some research, looking for some local haunts, and lo and behold, I come to find out that I live 15 minutes from one of the most haunted places on Earth, Sloss Furnace. The factory was built in the 1800s, and hundreds of men died there due to the grueling nature of the work. I read about the history and ghost stories other people told about the places and decided that this was going to be my first ghost hunt. My trip to Sloss Furnace occurred over the course of 2 days, the first day being my first time, and all I did was just walk around the place, read the exhibit signs, and explore the grounds. They turned the furnace into a museum that is open to the public, and they also use the grounds to host concerts, weddings, and other social events. They happened to be planning for a wedding the first day I was there, and a few tourists were milling around, so I wasn't completely alone, but the place was fascinating. I was able to walk into a few of the off-limits areas and look around. I pulled out my phone, started recording, went into the boiler room, and managed to catch a few orbs in the footage. It was cool, but nothing to write home about. I left, went home, and that was that. On the second day, at Sloss Furnace. My second day at Sloss Furnace will go down in the history books of ghost hunting. I managed to do what the ghost hunters, scariest place on earth, and countless paranormal investigation teams have failed to do, and that is film an actual ghost. One ghost would be impressive indeed, but what if I told you I filmed at least 5 ghosts? I can almost guarantee you that you have never seen ghost footage ever that comes even close to what you are about to see. When I pulled up the second day, it was a rainy, gloomy Sunday afternoon. As I drove to the gate, I saw a sign blocking the entrance saying that the museum was closed. It was hardly secure, so I just parked my car across the street and walked in through the front entrance. There was a construction crew working on the left end of the facility away from the actual furnace itself. When I walked into the entrance, I could see remnants of the wedding party from the day before. Apparently, they weren't responsible for cleaning. I made my way into the boiler room, took out my phone, and started recording again. Here I am all alone in a damp, dark factory, listening to the sound of the rain beating down against the roof, armed with only a cell phone. I walked through the boiler room, filming as I went along, and decided to call it a day. It wasn't until I got home, watched the rest of a playoff basketball game, and looked at my phone when I realized what I just captured. I was able to count at least 5 ghosts. The best part about it all is that I have proof. When you look at the film, go to the 320 mark, you will see a ghost. Go to 344, you will see a ghost, and up to 350, and you will see a literal ghost scene. If you slow it down, you will see ghosts peeping from different corners. Amazing. This is hands down the best ghost footage you will ever see.
Scared stiff is to fear something that you cannot see, and to feel its warmth is a true living hell. In July of 1993, I had purchased a trailer home in a small town just north of Baton Rouge. There I was, all alone, 18 years old and feeling totally lost. My father had just died the month before, and I was numb as a stone. I began fixing up the place, picking up knickknacks here and there, trying to make it cozy. One day while shopping at the flea market, I came across the most unusual set of Tahitian mugs. I had to have them. They had all different looks on their carved faces, yet all had the expression of what I felt inside. Hurt, mad, and pissed off at the world. Yes, I thought, they were definitely coming home with me. I know a bargain when I see one. The shopkeeper explained where they had come from. A man in town who owned a bar had gotten into a brawl one night and met an untimely demise. Afterwards, his wife closed it down and got rid of everything inside. So okay, I'm back home with them, and I display them on my bookshelf with so much pride, always wondering why is it that my guests aren't quite as pleased with my new selection as I am, and I actually saw a couple of them turn their noses up. Well, taste is all just a matter of opinion, right? It wasn't long after that I started having a lot of very weird things happen to me and anyone who came to visit. Sleeping in the living room, I could feel warmth behind me. When in the bedroom, the warmth was always right in front of the doorway, and every now and then, I would hear like a creaking like someone was walking. I always blew it off as part of my imagination though. As the death of my father started to really sink in, I started drinking alcohol very heavily. 1 or 2 bottles a day of cheap wine just to get to sleep at night. All the while, I'm becoming more aware that something is not right here. The creaks are louder, and I begin to feel something hovering over my shoulder in the daytime. Then my ex came to town and moved in. I told him about some of the things that I had felt and observed. He listened, yet looked at me like I was simply crazy. But his opinion soon changed. One night, a couple of months later, I was visiting at my mother's and decided to stay the night because it was raining so hard I didn't want to get on the road. He was alone, back at the house, and when I called him on the phone to tell him I wouldn't be home that night, he said, "I really want you to come over here. I've been hearing noises all night and it sounds like a man talking." And then right after he said that, I heard through the other end of the phone something slam the window and he started screaming, "You better get over here right now." I finally got up and worked my way to the car and hauled Hightail out of there. That same night, we had a kidnapping report filed on us because I was so hysterical of fear that a passerby walked up beside me in a parking lot and I almost had heart failure. On top of all that, there were more events. Several times, I heard knocking on my front door, only to discover that there was no one there when I answered. My boyfriend heard me calling his name when I was at the other end of the house. At times I would see from the corner of my eye, a large black figure. On other occasions, I'd see a small animal that looked like a rabbit or cat running behind furniture. Sometimes I even saw a book get thrown a few feet across the room by something that wasn't there. And when I decided to get rid of these damn things, the Tahian mugs, one came up missing. I looked all over for it, and it was nowhere to be found. At the advice of my family, they said they knew it had to be these things causing me all this grief. I searched frantically with no luck. I desperately wanted all of them out of the house, and once and for all. Finally, 6 months later, I found the lost mug, in the exact place it should have been. I remember seeing the dust ring that day as I reached up on the shelf to take it down. I had a bad feeling about carrying this thing anywhere, but I decided that I had no choice but to get rid of it. Well, I had a flat tire the next day. Getting rid of the mugs were not as easy as I thought it would be. I took them back to the store where I bought them from the same lady that acted like she didn't know who I was. She insisted that was not where I bought them, and more than that, she refused to take them back. I begged her and told her I didn't want the money. I didn't even want a credit. I finally left the store with the lady, open-mouthed, holding the box of mugs. I thought she must have known something. About 3 years ago, my mother's next-door neighbor was murdered, and at the estate sale, my mom picked up the exact type mug and said, "Tiffany, look at this." Her husband had committed suicide a few years earlier in the same house. Coincidence? Connected? Don't ask me, but I can give you one piece of advice. Before you walk across the next gravestone or buy or sell that pretty plate at the flea market, you must show some respect for the dead. When I was 17 years old, my grandmother, who had lived with us all my life, had died, and although there were many unusual events before and after her death, the most unusual occurrence involving my grandmother's death occurred the evening following her burial. My grandmother's funeral had been a trying thing for all of us. My mother was an only child who had never had the opportunity to know her father, and I am sure that the fact that her husband, my father, was stationed at Vietnam, and the fact that she could not get into contact with him through the Red Cross only made matters worse. My grandmother was a much-loved and well-respected woman whose life and death touched many people, and the outpouring of sympathy, the flowers and cards, the visits by friends and relatives proved to be almost overwhelming for my mother. Her grief and confusion was so oppressive that, following my grandmother's funeral and burial in the family cemetery, she confessed to me, my younger sisters of 16 and 13, and my baby brother of 4, that she could not bear to deal with all the people who would be coming to the house that afternoon. She suggested that we go to a restaurant, pick up a bucket of chicken, and go on a picnic. We did exactly that. Dressed in the same clothes we had worn to the funeral, we went on a family picnic, just the 5 of us, remembering and talking about the woman who had meant so much to each and every one of us. We stayed away from our house till just after dark, and when we were sure that no one was visiting, we entered the house and got ready for bed, as we were all exhausted, both physically and emotionally. The following story was related to me by my mother and sisters the next morning. I was asleep in my very bed in which my grandmother died. My sisters were sleeping together in their bed, and my baby brother was asleep in my mother's bed. My mother, who had insomnia, was lying in bed and reading. At around 2:30 in the morning, my 16-year-old daughter got out of bed and was heading to the bathroom when she ran screaming to my mother's room and told her that my grandma was sitting on the couch in the living room. She told my mother that they made a mistake and that our grandmother wasn't dead and that they had brought her home. My mother calmly explained that we all missed our grandmother and that my sister had been dreaming, that our grandmother was dead. As my mother tried to calm her down, my other sister came running into my mother's room and said that my grandmother was in the living room. My mother now had 2 excited girls to deal with and explained that my oldest sister had a dream and that the younger girl had heard them discussing that dream. She explained that my youngest sister had a dream of her own after hearing that discussion, but both my sisters were adamant, and my mother was forced to take them into the living room and prove to them that they were mistaken. My mother got out of her bed and walked down the hall and into the living room where she, herself, saw my grandmother sitting on the couch. My mother simply stood and stared at her mother, the woman who had been buried earlier that day, the woman who sat calmly on the couch and smiled at her and my two sisters. My mother says that her first thought was one of joy, that my sisters were correct in their belief that my grandmother had not died. Her next thought was pragmatic and sobering. Her mother was indeed dead, and what she was seeing was a figment of her overwrought imagination, a figment brought on by a stale mass of hypnosis she shared with my sisters in their dreams. As she stood there, my 4-year-old brother came walking out of her bedroom and into the living room. Half asleep and rubbing his eyes, he asked why was everyone awake in the middle of the night. At about the same time he asked this question, he looked across the living room in the direction of the couch. Throwing his arms out in front of him, my 4-year-old brother yelled "Mama!" and went running across the room towards the couch. My mother relates at this point, my grandmother smiled and simply faded away. I was not a witness to the preceding story, but the same tale is told by my mother and two sisters as to what happened on the night of my grandmother's burial. My brother does not remember the events of that evening, as he was only 4 years old and too young to appreciate the unique circumstances involving a visit from the dead. Thank you for reading. I was a student at a small university in Illinois. One night, my two friends and I were really bored. It was a late weekend night, so studying was out of the question. We decided to go out and play a childish game of hide and seek. We set out for the field in between the dorms and music building. Being left as the seeker, I quickly found one of my friends, Lynette, hiding underneath a tree, a story in its own right. Laughing over her antics, we realized that we hadn't found Crystal. We stood there, a moment, looking around as to where she might be. We spotted a person walking along the path on the outside of the field, heading towards the music building. The figure was all in black, or what also looked like a shadow. Deciding this was Crystal, we walked slowly to ambush her. Now, the building that Crystal was heading to had two entrances on opposite sides. When going through one door, you can walk straight through to the other. Crystal walked into one of the doors. We decided that Lynette would go into the building on the other side, scare her, and as Lynette escaped out the other door, I would scare her too. As I'm waiting outside, freezing my you-know-what off, I hear someone start practicing scales on their trumpet. I thought nothing of it. It was a music building after all. A few minutes later, the door opened, and Lynette was running down the stairs. "Where's Crystal?" I asked. She looked really pale and was shaking. "Can you hear the trumpet player?" Wondering why she was asking me about the trumpet player, I responded, "Yeah, so?" "Well, I was upstairs following who I thought to be Crystal. I couldn't see her when she went around the corner, and when I rounded the corner is when I heard the trumpet." She took a breath. "Well, I went to the only practice room with the light on to go say hi to the person, so I wouldn't scare them with my footsteps, and when I got to the room, no one was there. Cal, I mean no one. But the trumpet music was right in front of my face. I felt the air." She grabbed my arm, actually pulled me in the direction of the dorms. When we got around to the front of the music building, I looked up to the second-story windows, the practice rooms. In one of the rooms, the light was on, revealing a yellow room. The practice rooms are painted all blue. And right in front of the window was a shadow, arms upheld with a gleaming gold trumpet in his hands, the sounds of the scales falling to us below. I couldn't believe it. I wasn't scared, but more enthralled. In the few seconds that I had stood mesmerized, the shadow stopped playing and turned and bent its head down to us. I couldn't help but stare back. What seemed like a few minutes only lasted a second. He once again picked up his trumpet and practiced his scales. I wanted to go back to the building and go upstairs to see him, but Lynette was about to tear my arm off of my body. I remember her saying over and over again on the cold walk back to the dorms that there was no one in there. So where was Crystal? She found a great hiding place. We found her in the room watching TV. I could have killed her. When I was very young, my father recanted to me the tale of Murder Road, an old bridge out in the boonies about 10 miles south of my hometown. For my own story to make sense, I'd better summarize the story of Murder Road for you, the ever-faithful readers. It's been a good 20 years since that event occurred, although I'm not sure of the exact date. Found by the bridge in an old car were the bodies of 4 unfortunate individuals who, by some cruel twist of fate, had been brutally murdered. All 4, a family from out of town, had been shot in close range and left in their vehicle. The crime was never solved. A crime such as this is probably no big deal to folks from New York or Detroit or other big cities where murders are unfortunately too common, but in Ottawa, Kansas, population now 12,000, it's a different story. Since my youth, I've been fascinated by this place and the story behind it, and once I was old enough to drive, I made frequent trips to the spot, always alone, usually during the day. It's a heck of a creepy place at night, if you know the story behind it. As my years and my bravery grew, it became common for me to venture to the spot after dark, although usually with high beams on and windows up. It took a lot of guts for me to finally bring myself to stop the vehicle, but I never got out of the car. I was making it a pretty routine trip by July of '97. It was a good place to be alone and think. There wasn't much traffic. I approached the bridge and got the usual chills as I got close. The area is pretty much open fields until you reach the bridge, where a thick grove of trees rises up on either side of the small stream that runs through, making it darker and somehow more sinister on the bridge itself. I pulled off to the side of the road, no more than 6 feet from the bridge. I dropped my seat back and closed my eyes, relaxing. Only a few moments later, there was a tap on my window. My eyes flew open and I sat bolt upright. There was a scraggly looking man outside, and he looked none too pleased with me. "Out of the car," he mouthed. Terrified, I complied. "Turn around," he whispered, "and put your hands in the car." I did as I was told. It was unseasonably chilly out, and a light rain had started down. I began to shiver, but more out of fear than anything else. I gasped as something cold and hard was pressed into my neck. From my right came a terrified scream, and I glanced over. In the corner of my eye, I saw a black car, its bumper touching mine. The driver's side window was shattered, and a lifeless body was slumped over the steering wheel. I wanted to scream, but the cold metal of the gun on my neck kept me quiet. There was a sudden, harsh gust of wind through the trees, and the pressure on my neck vanished. I whirled around, my heart thumping powerfully. There was no one there. The car was gone too. Needless to say, I was out of there in a flash. It was sometime later before what had happened really hit me. I had nightmares for weeks. I still go out there, although not as much. I assumed that I was just out on a bad night, but I won't be there again in July. Thanks for reading. This tale is still very disturbing to me, since it involves my father, who had passed away almost 10 years before the occurrence. My wife and I usually have friends over on a Saturday night. This particular Saturday night happened to be in the month of October, which is a special month for my wife Jamie and my son DJ. It also happens to be a special time for John and Sonia, our friends. We love to sit around and scare each other with chilling ghost stories. On this one particular Saturday night in 1994, we all gathered around my kitchen table to listen to our friend Sonia tell us some very eerie tales passed down from her family. We did have a Ouija board to use, but by the time she was done telling her tales, I was shaking so much that I broke the board over my head and threw it away, outside and into the garbage. The conversation of ghosts prompted me to talk about my dead father. In no uncertain terms, I made it clear that I did not miss him at all because he was a mean, rotten man in life. I went so far as to say that if I ever saw his ghost, I would tell him so. Sonia told me not even to joke that way. It's an open invitation to evil, and I should repent immediately. I only laughed and got more bold, demanding an appearance so I could tell him how I feel. My wife and Sonia were so upset, I decided to stop. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, my wife and I went to sleep. My son was already out like a light. I must admit, laying there in the dark, I was fairly spooked. Finally, sleep came, but I was awoken at 3 a.m. by a steady and repetitive thumping noise. Thump, then silence for 3 seconds, then another thump, over and over and over. I lay there paralyzed with fear. What could this noise be? I tried to rationalize anything, even wake my wife, but I was too scared to move. Yet, the thump continued, only it was getting louder and louder and louder. I finally realized that I have family to protect, and using all my strength on courage, I got out of bed to investigate. My wife remained in a deep sleep. As I walked through the hall in the dark, I noticed that the kitchen light was on. Hadn't I turned that off? Fearing the unknown, I snuck into my son's room for a baseball bat, which somehow didn't erase my fear. I was almost at the kitchen now, close to an hour after hearing the first thumps. Yes, the noise was coming from the kitchen. Sweat formed on my forehead, and I was shaking like an autumn leaf. I entered the kitchen and turned to the left, where our table sat. I wanted to scream and run in terror, but I was paralyzed. There, at the far chair, sat my father, 10 years dead, yet there he was. His right hand raised and came down with a fist on the kitchen table. Thump. That was the noise that I've heard for the past hour. He was looking directly into my eyes, yet his were dead. He stared right through me, then opened his mouth and spoke in a voice I never in my life wished to hear again.
Stop. Stop talking about me.
Then he slammed his fist down in one final violent thump. The kitchen light went out. I let out a gasp as my heart sank, and I quickly turned the light on again, but he was gone. I caught my breath and turned on every light I could find. An hour later, laying in bed, I wondered, had I dreamt the whole event? The next morning, my wife, Jamie, was up before me. She came in and woke me up and asked me if I had forgotten to turn the lights off before coming to bed. I told her I had. She asked me to come into the kitchen and look at something strange, and I almost screamed. I slowly followed her into the kitchen, trying to hide my fear. She pointed to the very chair where my father had sat only a few hours earlier. I then knew it wasn't a dream. "Look at that," she said. "Where did all that dirt on that chair come from?" It was true. There was a thin layer of dirt on the chair and on the floor surrounding it. I muttered some excuse, and to this day, I've never told my family or friends of this occurrence, and I've never spoken ill of the dead since.
My first story begins when I lived in Ohio, USA. I was driving back to my house one day with my friends when I saw a girl visiting a graveyard. She was right at the top by a statue of an angel. The girl looked very young, about 11 years old. She was wearing old-fashioned clothes. I went up to the grave the next day. The inscription was written on the angel's Bible. It said in memory of Jane Doe, died 1832 to 1845, died of tuberculosis. I did not use the girl's name out of respect. I now realize that yesterday I'd seen a ghost. I can see the graveyard from where I live, and I always see a girl visit the grave. One time I went up there to see if I could catch a glimpse of the girl. This time, she was bending over two other graves. I went away because I thought the girl was starting to sense my presence. I came back though, and found the two graves. These two were her mother and father. They had also died of tuberculosis. It looked like no one came and took care of this grave, so I would come up there sometimes and clean the graves. When I had finished cleaning the girl's grave one day, I looked up and saw the girl watching me. She was smiling. She followed me home. I wasn't bothered because I knew she was harmless. It was almost like she was an old friend to me. This second set of experiences happened in Wrightwood, California. The interesting thing about the area in particular is that there are constant reported sightings of Indians everywhere. And the women in my family see an older woman around our houses, near the children's rooms.
Townspeople who are aware of her say she is a nurse of sorts, and that she checks on the small children of the town, protecting them. The weirdest one so far is the half-Indian. All that is ever seen is the top half of an Indian, head to waist and floating. Most seem to see this figure especially down by the old ranch that sits in Cajun Pass, on Highway 66, between Clegherd Road and Kenwood. That's where the figure would appear. Many times around Thanksgiving, which makes you wonder a little bit. Anyway, my sister has seen him on Lone Pine Ranch Road around Clyde Ranch, the only structure on Lone Pine, until you reach Wrightwood. We have a lot of paranormal activity happening constantly, according to those who are tuned into it, or have that sixth sense. And if one's violent or sudden death brings about that type of activity, then we add approximately 10 spirits every year because of the slippery snow-covered roads like Lone Pine. That, and the lack of common sense that California drivers possess. For years, the ranch my grandpa owns has been the center of many disturbing experiences. Though I did not experience them firsthand, I'm going to tell you some real stories about the place. Now I'm going to start with this ranch was built on an Indian burial ground, or this is what my mom tells me. My mother, Grace, lived there with her dad's sister and 2 of her brothers. They only lived there part-time. They lived in San Luis Obispo with my grandmother. They'd go to the ranch on weekends along with my grandfather. My grandmother would stay behind because she hated the ranch. On the 4th of July, my mom had her friend come over, and this is when they were older, maybe in their 20s, and she let her stay in the bedroom with the guy she got close to. So my mom ended up on the couch. In the middle of the night, she sat straight up, like in the horror movies, where people sit straight up, all of a sudden in the middle of their sleep. She had no clue why, but she was so scared to death. She started to look around, and out of nowhere, she started seeing little dashes and wisps of silver light. They would fly right over her, and there would be deep wafts of cold air. She got up and ran to the bedroom. The guy my mom's friend got close to worked at the ranch as a gardener, and had experiences like this before seeing he'd worked there a long time. He said he thinks it's an Indian burial ground, but couldn't be sure. When my mom was young, not such great things happened at the ranch. I only know of one, but I'll tell you about it. My grandpa would bring weird friends that he met to the ranch. There was one guy in particular who came, and every time he'd play a game, where all the boys including my uncle's friends would have to play, it was basically a hide-and-seek game. But when he found them, he would pretend to torture them, and he'd throw them in a pool, which definitely wasn't a pleasant thing. My Uncle Martin was so scared of this guy, and he had good reason. This man was an old Vietnam War veteran. You could pretty much call him crazy. My uncle spent most of his days at the ranch, preparing for when he came. He did not want to be found. He had a place ready on this tree with a little stash of candy bars and packet drinks in the ladder that he could pull up after him. When the man came, he found everyone but Martin and looked for him till it was well past dark. Finally, they found him, but he wouldn't come down, and didn't. I had lived at the ranch for about 6 months, and my mom was scared to death of it, so we moved. My dad had lived with us. There was no power, so matches were common. After we had moved, my mom's younger brother Nick and his wife Shelley moved in. They had my little cousins Larry, the oldest, Amanda, second, and Monica, the youngest. My cousin Larry had gotten hold of matches when he climbed out of the crib he was in with Amanda. He climbed back in and started a fire, not knowing the consequences, being as young as he was. My Aunt Shelley was upstairs taking a nap with Monica, and my Uncle Nick was at work. Shelley came out running out of the building and left Monica outside, running back in to get Larry. It was too late for Amanda, and they still have her ashes. Larry lived, but he has third-degree burns that have scarred him permanently. My uncle divorced Shelley due to other problems in their marriage. He got remarried to another woman named Tracy, and together, they had a child named Caitlin Elizabeth. Just a while ago, they figured out she was deaf. My grandpa lived at the ranch regularly till he broke his back. He was riding his horse on a mountain by a steep ravine. Being an experienced rider, he didn't have much of a risk factor. No one knows what, but something spooked the horse and he fell off, down the ravine, and broke his back. Now he's in a wheelchair, and it seems like he'd rather die than not be able to live at the ranch. So far he's not there, but he's trying to get there. Another bit that interests me about my family's ranch is that it tore my mom's side of the family apart. There have been endless fights about it, and pretty much everyone is turned away from each other. Are all these things a coincidence? I don't know, but I find it hard to think of it that way. I went to Santa Catalina summer camp, but it was also a boarding school. For some reason, there is one room that is never open for boarders. It's at the end of the hall in the 4th dorm, and the story about it was that a girl was going there for senior year and was trying to get into Harvard. When she got the rejection letter, she OD'd on sleeping pills. This happened a year or two after my mom had gone there. When I went there for summer camp, there was a girl who said she had gone in there to turn off a light that was on. This was odd, because no one was allowed to go in there. The two girls were curious about the room and snooped around. When they opened the closet, there was red writing all inside the walls of the closet. They screamed and ran out, telling the counselor what they saw. The counselor was clearly scared out of her mind to go into that room. Before she turned off the light, she checked the closet. The walls were clean. Throughout the nights and days at Catalina, the light would turn on without anyone there. The presence was overwhelming and strong. Sometimes just an eerie feeling. You can't prove it, just feel it. I lived in Springfield, Missouri for 5 years, and have been a frequent visitor to the Wilsons Creek battlefield. The place is a presence that you could feel day or night, because it was the site of a good-sized battle, and the park rangers will tell you the same thing of sightings while they patrolled the park, or hearing gunfire and cannons going off. One of the most active spots in the battlefield is the farmhouse that doubled as the field hospital where the wounded were brought in for amputation in the home. But I believe it was a Confederate hospital, if my memory serves me correctly. Last year in June, myself and a few friends were given permission to camp the night at the location so that we could experience the events reported ourselves. One of my friends got his degree in psychology and wanted to see if the reportings were due to the history of the area, and we confirmed everything the park ranger had told us. At midnight, we began to hear what we could have sworn to be low moaning coming from the house, and what we could have sworn were the shadows of several people passing the windows, as well as the footsteps on the front porch. The footsteps would either sound like someone pacing as if on guard duty or waiting, or it would sound like someone running into the home, such as an orderly or a surgeon, But the one thing that remains in my mind was a smell that suddenly just arose around us of blood. It was a heavy smell that lingered in the air, that just made you almost want to scream, because it had incredible sadness and pain. There was also a constant presence being verified of cold spots that would allow us to see our breath, and this made it very uncomfortable, because it was an 85-degree night. The presence would get stronger throughout the night, and finally, when we composed ourselves, I looked at the house and said as loud as I could, "We know you are with us, and we know the sacrifice that you have made. Please leave this place in peace." My friends, of course, gave me that look that I had lost it, but they immediately noticed that there was a calm feeling now, instead of agitation and sadness. Before we left, we placed a small flag and an American flag that we bought and placed them on either side of the front porch of the field house and gave them a salute out of respect for the soldiers. I've since moved to Florida, but still keep in contact with my friends as well as the park ranger, and we still talk about that night as well as the other occurrences they've seen on return visits. I hope this helps to prove the skeptics that there is a presence of lost life on that site, and that they want us to know how, so what happened to him will not be repeated to others. I lived in my newly built home for 1 year now. It all started when I woke groggy from sleep. I heard a woman crying and thought perhaps it was my child or neighbor. Her husband would travel often. I realize now that it was a linked experience. It was a couple of days ago, and I'd stayed up late watching TV, started to get tired, and decided to go to sleep. So I walked upstairs and went to my bedroom, laid down, and was fast asleep. I remember dreaming, and the woman that I heard for a year crying came to me. She came over me and put one hand on my throat and the other on my mouth and face. She began to strangle me. All I can remember after was willing myself to be awakened. I was flailing, kicking, and trying to scream. That is when I finally awoke. My husband was laying right next to me the whole time. He was also awake after the episode, scared and wondering what the heck. He told me that I was really screaming and tossing all over. You know when you watch someone sleep, and they say they were screaming, it's always muffled. I wasn't. Tonight, me and my sister were making dinner for all the kids, hobo dinners to be exact, and we had made all the kids come in one at a time to pick out their ingredients in their own hobo dinner. If you don't know what hobo dinners are, they have an assortment of vegetables and meat, or chicken, and condensed soup wrapped in aluminum foil. We have made the first three, no hitches. Then came little A, we'll call her that. She picked up her foods and we argued that she had to have more than chicken and broccoli. She didn't want to, but agreed. So I folded hers up and put it into an oven with the other three, realizing that when I put in the fifth one, I would have to move them all. We then proceeded to make the last one, and we never left the kitchen. Upon finishing, I opened the oven and found that little A's dinner was gone. I put it in there myself, and it was not small, not something you could misplace. We searched the entire kitchen and surrounding areas. No dinner. We made her another one, but couldn't get over the lost hobo dinner. We talked about it for a few hours while our husbands researched the kitchen. Then we started talking of related stories, and the woman came up. We joked that she ate it, or her deceased grandma did. Then I told my sister and her husband of my dream experience. My husband chimed in and finished the dream, but I didn't even know the end. He had said that after he had gotten up the next morning, I came out of our bedroom crying and saying that the ghost tried to suffocate me again. Then he said I proceeded to get a glass of water and went back to my room. that happens to be on the top floor and my kitchen on the main. I didn't know that happened. Then he also started talking about an old forgotten coal mine and how a girl died in one here in Littleton, Colorado. So we went online and somehow in our main searches came to this site. Do you think that maybe the deaths of the miners and their families are still here, reminding us of all the injustices they faced in their lives? Or are they just wanting us to take notice and change things? Early last year, me and my youngest daughter was cleaning an empty house to make extra money. Being sensitive to spirit guides, I picked up a presence, but chose to ignore it and clean the home. My daughter kept hearing someone tell her to come upstairs, and she wouldn't do it. As evening approached, we headed upstairs to vacuum the bedrooms. Whatever the presence was, it kept on blocking the vacuum from the wall and threw a marble at the wall also. I also felt a cold hand attempt to brush me down the stairs as I was going from one bedroom to the other. I dropped the vacuum and fled down the stairs, telling whatever it was that we would be back the next day. As we were locking the door, we felt someone on the other side trying to stop us from locking up and leaving. The next day, I lit a white candle and stood at the foot of the stairs. I simply stated we were here to do a job and mean no harm to him. I also said that we would leave as soon as the house is clean. After that, we felt them. They let us do our job. The house is rented now, and I won't step foot on the property anymore. I had a very tall black shadow step on the house's porch and speak to me using telepathy. It told me not to come back to its territory, or else it will push me down the stairs next time. Meaning I have small grandkids. That's fine by me never to go over there again. I'm still not sure what I encountered, but I didn't like it. The new tenants can deal with it. As for me, I don't need the money that bad to come in contact with whatever lives in my neighbor's house.
First off, I want to apologize in advance for the length of these stories, but I have had a few experiences spread over my 24 years that I think would be worth writing down. I will start with the house I lived in for 9 months when I was 16. This was an old Victorian on a small, and I mean small, plot of land, smack dab in a nice little residential neighborhood. I, who happened to love Victorians, yellow the most, which this house was completely delighted. The very first night I was there, things changed. I was alone with my younger sister who was about 14 at the time, and also my little brother who was almost 2 years old. It was late November or early December, and it was snowing out. My parents had gone back to the old house to get more of our things and to pick up a pizza for dinner. My sister and I sat on a mattress in the middle of the living room floor, reading to our brother with the radio on for some background noise. I noticed that my brother was distracted and kept looking at the stairs, and I was hearing a pounding noise. It wasn't all that loud, and easily I could have ignored it, but I decided to reach over and lower the radio, and that is when we all heard it. It was footsteps. I swear to God to this, that the sound they made was so stereotypical that it could have been used on any of those sound effects tapes people buy around Halloween. It was a heavy work boot type of a sound, but hollow, and it went down the stairs, which we had a good view of, but on which nothing was there to the naked eye, and then back up to the hall upstairs, where it completed this little trek again and again. Well, needless to say, we flipped out. My sister and I were about to go outside and sit on the porch to wait for our parents. But we had a little kid with us, and it was cold and snowing. So even though we were completely terrified, We turned up the radio as loud as we could and just sat there. I think my brother knew something was up because he was unusually quiet and just played by our feet with toy cars. Well, when our parents got home, we all but ambushed them and begged them to take us back to the old house. They, who have had their own experiences, probably believed us, but not wanting to frighten us, chalked it up to our imaginations. Other things happened in that house, like the upstairs attic light would be on all the time, even though no one really went up there. And there was one time I firmly believed that whatever was in the house touched me. I was in my bedroom and had just gotten out of the shower. I had on only a short robe and was bending over to pick up some clothes. And then I felt a tug on the back of my robe. Well, I spun around like a flash and tried to rationalize it in my head. Maybe I caught it on something, but I was in the middle of the room and there was nothing around me. All my furniture was pushed up against the walls. That really flipped me out. To this very day, I have tried and tried to relive that feeling and can't. It was so odd, it's truly hard to explain. But anyway, there were other things. Like things would disappear and reappear. And my sister hated her bedroom and would often sleep in mine on the floor. My parents had their own experiences, but it wasn't until we were moving out that the footsteps returned. My mum was downstairs in the basement alone, doing laundry, when she heard someone walking around upstairs. So she went upstairs thinking it was the realtor to find the swinging doors that separated the hall from the kitchen, swinging back and forth. But there was no one there. My dad had a similar experience as well. The other experience has to do with another place we lived in, an apartment in a 3-family house. We were on the 2nd floor. This was when I was 18 or so. The first few years were relatively quiet, but whatever it was, got really started when I went away to college. The beds and the couches would shake and vibrate for no reason that my family could see. And when I came back home, I too had this happen to me. It was a really odd sensation, like someone had grubbed the sides of the bed and was shaking it. It was not a nice feeling, but lasted anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute and a half. I was not around when other things happened, like my brother's toys would come on in the middle of the night, even though they were off. It got to the point that my dad would get up, grab the toy and fling it onto the porch. My sister also had terrible nightmares, and I had the creepy feeling of being watched while I did dishes at the kitchen sink. I could literally feel someone staring at me from the hallway. When I would get up the nerve to look, no one was ever there. I have a few other stories, but this is the most recent. My sister, partner and I were at a local cemetery that has a reputation for being haunted, and I wanted to get a couple of pictures. I had gone previously and have had no luck, but have been there when others have gotten orbs and the like. Well, first off, this cemetery always has toys on the graves. They were dolls and plastic horses. That is easily explained as there are many graves for small children, and people can either be playing jokes or being sympathetic to all the young children who died so young and are leaving them presents. But last night, in addition to the usual toys, there were other strange things, including a dead rabbit lying by a headstone, and a few feet away the torso of a dress mannequin just lying there. I don't jump to conclusions, and that can be all explained easily enough, but they still added to the atmosphere. And when you are strolling about a notoriously haunted cemetery at night on a backcountry road and spy dead animals and what looks like a dead body, well, you get freaked out. End of story. But I've done this before, and from the above and other things that have happened, I got over it. My sister was snapping off pictures left and right, and then she and my partner are looking at one, and my sister goes, there is nothing there. And Rhonda goes, wait, just turn it around. Well, my sister flips and goes, oh, I'm so out, and bolts, and I mean bolts across the cemetery, across the street, and into the car with Rhonda in hot pursuit. I, mind you, have been left in the dust, so to speak, since I was not beside them when they looked at the photo that spooked them so bad. I trudged after them and into the car. Mind you, I'm a little ticked off because I was having an okay time there. And when I saw the photo, my heart stopped. It is of a headstone, but off to the side of it is a man's face. It is so clear, in fact, that you can make out a white collar and a black shirt, and what seems to be a short black mustache. It is not a nice face, and on closer inspection, there is another image in the headstone of a crying baby with hands over its mouth. Now, I am not sure of the image on the headstone because I am quite aware that anything can cause an image to appear. The grain of the stone, moss on it, etc. But the face, that is another matter entirely. I do not know how in the world to explain that. It's unbelievable.
Many years ago, I lived in an old farmhouse. It was pretty big, and I was newly married. We would have friends stay periodically as they needed to. We had many things happen. The one bedroom always had flies in the window. I would spray, vacuum, and scrub the windows. The next day, the room was always full of flies. My best friend and her husband needed a place to stay for a while, and I let them choose the room they wanted. They chose the room of flies. This one night she was sleeping and felt someone pushing her to roll over. She thought her husband had gotten up in the middle of the night and was coming back to bed. When she rolled over, she fell against her husband. She looked to see who pushed her, and although no one was there, she felt the pressure of someone lying against her. She tried to wake her husband, but he would not wake up. She was so scared, she stayed awake the rest of the night until morning, and was too afraid to look and see what was next to her. Finally, when daylight hit, she felt the pressure leave, and noticed the indentation of a body left behind on the bed. They never slept in that room again. We also had dogs that would not go upstairs or downstairs. I was doing dishes in the kitchen and the upstairs stairwell was behind me. All of a sudden, my dog perked up and his hair stood on its back. He started to growl as if he was looking towards the doorway and suddenly bolted for the living room. He would not come into the kitchen after that unless I was with him. My dogs would also stand at the doorway to the basement and would have their hair raised on their backs. I was always scared to go down there. I would get a really bad feeling where I would run down and back up. I would try and get one of my dogs to go with me, even in daylight, and they would not go further than the doorway. We would also hear someone walking through the home, but nobody would be there. The one spirit would be talking, and we would look for the voice and couldn't even find it. Sometimes it would call out our names, and we would think it was each other and answer, and find out it wasn't anyone calling. We slept in a downstairs bedroom, and I would have a sense of a man standing at the foot of our bed, watching us as we go to sleep. Our dogs even went to sleep with us, and wouldn't even sleep at the foot of the bed. After many strange activities, our neighbor told us that an elderly man had lived alone in the house for a long time. His mail had been piling up in his mailbox, so the mailman contacted the police to have them check on the old guy. He was found dead on the kitchen floor, and had been for quite a while. The funny thing is, the kitchen was never spooky feeling. My name is Amy, and I want to share something that happened to my family about 9 years ago. I have some free time on my hands, so I thought I might as well. As I said, about 9 years ago, my husband and I and our 4 children, ages 12, 11, 9, and 5, moved into the small 4-bedroom home. From the day we moved in, we knew that there was something about this home. It wasn't really a bad feeling, but something different. The feeling was almost welcome, like we were meant to be there. We were happy to be there. It was a comfortable house for people who were used to living in apartments. We had bedrooms, a living room, bathroom, and a kitchen on the first floor, and a bedroom with a bathroom, and a small porch, plus a larger room with a smaller room off to the left, on the second floor. At one time, the house had 2 apartments. The upstairs had 1 bedroom with a bathroom, a living room, and a small kitchen off to the left. The first floor had 2 bedrooms and a bathroom, living room, and kitchen with access to a basement. At the time we found this house, it seemed like almost a godsend, since we were being evicted because we had acquired a dog. And this house had a nice-sized yard, and the landlord didn't mind pets. Well, soon after we moved in, strange things started to happen. Well, since I was a stay-at-home mom most of the time due to being the parent of an ADHD child, I was the one to experience most of the phenomena. You see, while my husband was at work and the kids at school, I would hear light footsteps downstairs. But for anyone who has lived in apartments, your first thought is it's the neighbors, until you come to the realization that you are now living in a home, and there is no way you're going to hear the neighbor. It's a single-family home, for crying out loud. But I put it out of my mind, telling myself that I was so used to hearing the patter of small feet that I could still hear it when no one is at home. We had minor things happen, like the footsteps when there was only one person home, things disappearing and turning up somewhere you knew it shouldn't be, sightings by a friend who had never been to our house, and finally, the sound of a small die-cast toy car falling down the stairs and hitting the back door. For anyone who has small boys, you know what a Hot Wheel sounds like when it is hit by a surface because you've heard it before. Anyway, this is what my husband and I heard on a nightly basis. One day, about 8 months of living there, a friend of my husband brought over a new girlfriend for us to meet. As far as we were concerned, nothing out of the ordinary happened that day until Jimmy, my husband's friend, brought by his girlfriend China. At this point, I should explain a few things. The bedroom with the bathroom belonged to my husband and I. The large room that used to be a living room, because our computer room, and the little room off to the left became our daughter's room. Secondly, we did not allow our kids to have friends over, due to things disappearing whenever certain friends come over. Well, the next time the girlfriend came over, she asked us how many kids we had, and I told her 3 boys and 1 girl. Then she asked us who the little boy downstairs had been, and I asked her what little boy. She said the last time she had visited us, there had been a little boy in diapers playing Nintendo 64 with my kids, and I told her politely there was no other child but mine in the home. She insisted that I saw another little boy in diapers today, and the last time I came playing Nintendo 64 with your kids. I told her she was mistaken, as my kids were not allowed to have friends over. Well, of course, she dropped it after that. But to this day, she still swears she sees the little boy in diapers in our house. At other times when I was alone at home, I would hear someone knocking on my bedroom door, and I would automatically ask what, and realize there was no one home but me when I received no answer. This happened to me a lot. At times I would hear someone playing in the boys' rooms downstairs. When the kids were at school, about 1 year after we moved in, my oldest and I took newspaper routes. About 4 months after we started our paper routes, I was rolling newspapers before delivering them when the front page caught my eye. The picture on the front page looked like my house, but there were no toddler toys on the lawn, and I had no toddlers at the time. So I read it and found out that exactly 1 year before we moved in, a little boy of about 1 year of age had died in the home. It seems that Miles had been living there with his foster mother, her father, and her children. One day the foster mother went out and left her father to watch little Miles. While she was out, her father, in a fit of rage, hit Miles while the little boy was at the top step on the second floor, which, by the way, happened to be near my bedroom door. The little boy lost his balance upon being struck and fell down the stairs and broke his neck. As I read this, little things began to fall into place, and I realized that maybe Miles was still there. The last thing to happen there was about 3 months before we moved out. It was late, and my husband and I were still talking and watching TV, when again, we heard the little car falling down the steps and hit the back door. I knew my kids were sleeping because that was the only sound in an otherwise silent home. So I jokingly said, "All right, Miles, it is late, and it's bedtime for little kids, and even little ghosts." What I heard next chilled me to the bone and freaked me out so bad, I was almost in tears. As soon as I said that, I heard a little tiny giggle, which my husband also heard, and I promptly said, "Do whatever you want." As I said before, up to this point, we thought we were imagining everything that was happening there, and never wanted to believe that we had a ghostly tenant. The strange thing is, we were never scared while we lived there. The feeling there was we were home, and this is where we were meant to live. Unfortunately, due to circumstances beyond our control, we had to move. Otherwise, we would still be living there. It was the most comfortable place I'd ever lived in, and I loved it there. I have other stories that happened to family members, and also myself. Maybe I will share more of this. For now, I hope you enjoy this story, and maybe can tell me if it was really a haunting. My name is Randy, and I've been reading many of the true ghost stories on your website, and I must say, a lot of this stuff is genuine, and it sends chills down my spine. I know from experience. Let's go way back to the 1970s, to the city of Toronto. My mom and my dad were in a band. My mom left my stepdad for a woman in the band, and we, meaning me and my younger brother, my mom and her lover, moved into a rooming house. 2 rooms on the second floor, with a kitchen and a bathroom, on a street called Bartmount, near Pepe and Queen. The first day we moved there, maggots came crawling out from underneath the baseboard of one of the walls of my room. My mom and her girlfriend, shrieking and squishing bugs. Anyway, my mom would leave me and my brother there alone at night, so she could play music with the band. Besides, the lady who lived on the first floor had 3 boys my age, and she would come up periodically during the night, or right away, if we called out. Well, it started that night out. When everyone was gone and my brother was asleep, I would hear the voice of a child quietly muttering or praying, and I wasn't the least bit frightened, at first. Now please keep in mind, this was a long time ago, and I don't remember anything in particular it said to me. It was like an imaginary friend, I assumed. Then one night, I was in a mood or something, and for some reason, I was being cruel to my younger brother, as children sometimes are, and he went to sleep crying. Now, this spirit or entity took on a much more terrifying persona. It hated me, and nighttime was now a horrifying experience. There were a few things that it did almost nightly, like yanking the covers off, or making it seem as though there was a huge rat underneath the covers, scream profanities constantly, rattle the dishes that were left to dry on the counter. I would beg my mom to stay home and scream for that poor woman who lived down the stairs, or I would try to keep my brother awake, but he could sleep through anything. The most terrifying thing that ever happened was this ball of light red, but then it changed as it traveled up and down the wall, spitting electricity. It got so bad that I couldn't even sleep, and kids at school were accusing me of wearing makeup, eyeshadow. I became accident prone and finally got poked in the eye by some girl at school, and my mother sent me to stay at my grandmother's for a month. By the time I recovered, we moved away a few days after I returned. For years, I had never had that happen to me since. It seemed like for a while, and even I forget it happened, but not anymore. There are a couple things I learned from this experience. First thing was that spirit was a child, and secondly, that spirits do exist. And lastly, I'm no psychic or detective or anything, but I bet there's a body buried behind the wall in that room. I've experienced hauntings since I was about 5 or 6 years old. The very first time was when my family moved into the house my uncle owned. We lived downstairs, and they lived upstairs. It was a pretty old house. Well, after a few weeks of living there one summer, my dad went to the grocery store. Though it's strange, my parents would leave me alone at the home because I hated leaving the home. The grocery store was on the corner anyway. That day I was alone, and I heard someone walking up the stairs, thinking it was my cousin or aunts. I went upstairs, where they always left the door open for us. I walked in, and no one was in the house. I checked the living and bathroom, the kitchen. No one was there, but I kept hearing someone behind me. Then out of nowhere, this doll appeared by the door. It wasn't there when I walked in. I wasn't very scared, but just a little shook up. I went downstairs and stayed in my living room, looking out my window for my dad to come home. Well, we ended up moving 3 years later, when I was 8. This time we moved into a Victorian-style home. Cherry wood and old heaters. Very romantic, with a small chandelier. I fell in love with the home. I've always loved old homes. Months after moving in, I would hear someone in the bathroom rummaging or washing their hands. I would walk in there, and no one would be there. Everything would stop. Later, I would be sometimes sitting in the kitchen, eating cereal, and I saw a tall man with another oddly tall woman, not dressed in Victorian wear, but still old-fashioned, maybe 1930s or 40s. I saw them standing down the hall in there, looking straight at me. I looked at them for a little bit, and then they were gone. They were misty, and I remember seeing the sun shining through them. It was very calm. Other times that I stayed home alone in this new home, I would hear someone walking up the stairs, and then it would stop if I would call out. One day they didn't stop. I was watching TV. It then turned off, and I couldn't even figure out why. And then I sat on the couch playing with a little music recorder I talked into. I heard my name being called from the stairs. It didn't sound like my dad, but in my head, I was forcing myself to think it was, and I called out Daddy. No one answered. I just kept hearing my name. and someone walking closer up the stairs. I heard the footsteps and my name. I became really frightened, and I heard a soft chuckle of a man. Well, after that, I had many more experiences now that I'm 18, and they have just stopped. I kind of miss them, and sometimes want to contact them again. That is the earliest of my experience. Just for the record, I'm not alone. I am normal, have a normal job, and I'm not crazy at all. I was staying at my friend's house. We all planned to sleep in the living room. Laura, Dave, and myself. I knew Dave was leaving early in the morning for work at 6 a.m. I woke to go to the loo in the night, and found Laura had gone to bed in her own room upstairs. So it was just me and Dave sleeping in the living room. It was getting light when I found myself awake, even though I felt tired. I awoke suddenly but peacefully, and I was very much awake. I didn't dream this. I was wondering why I was awake, in my head, not out loud, when I heard breathing, 2 sets of deep in and out heavy breaths. I instantly thought, oh, it's okay, it's Dave breathing. The next thing I thought was, hang on, Dave's not even here. He had left for work, and straight after that thought came, Laura said her house was haunted. Before I could even ponder that, I heard a voice. An older man's voice right in my ear, so close, I could feel him near me whispering. He said, I'll wrap you in my grave. He sounded full of malice, and just really hateful. I was terrified, and was stuck in that position. I was so afraid. After about 15 minutes, I held my hands over my ears, and screamed till Laura came down. But where I had my eyes closed, when she tried to get me to realize she was there, I thought I was the ghost, and then I screamed even more. She says I was hysterical for a while, until she calmed me down. It was not a dream. Laura then told me her sister used to wake in the middle of the night because she couldn't breathe and felt like someone was sitting on her chest. Laura's mom told me that Laura, when she was little, used to ask who the people in her house was when there was no one there but herself and her mom. I had trouble sleeping for months after, and still can't sleep on that side or with the lights off alone. When he said the word wrap, I had a visual image of cherries, which I thought was strange. It was like saying something in a German word you recognize when you only speak English. What he said doesn't make much sense. But when I told my mom, she thought he might have said the R-A-P-E word and not rap. It sounded like rap though. Well, that's it. Here's a nightmare I had one night. It's very scary, so brace yourself. One night in the cold, harsh winter of the snow belt in Cleveland, Ohio, I was making my tea, waiting until it was done steeping. As I finished watching my nightly program, I slowly limped to my cold, damp room. Hence, my heating ducts aren't very good, and my room is on the complete opposite side of my house, away from my furnace, and on the outskirts of the other bedrooms. As I arrived in my room, I turned on a portable heater, let my Harrier dog in, and limped over to my bed, and crawled under the blankets and flannel sheets. It was a freezing night, and my bed was freezing. As I went half asleep, I remember my mother walking in and turning off my heater. After that, I was completely emboweled in the satisfying darkness of slumber. I was sound asleep, and not to be disturbed until my own cries of horror awakens me. As I sit watching TV, Too vague to tell what program it was. I was merely amused watching it. Lesser the fact that it seemed that there was no screen that I could make out. I zoned everything out. As my mother walks into the kitchen from my long outstretched foyer, the foyer seemed like it was 50 feet long. A great chandelier hanging from the sky, expensive wall murals, and a marble floor, which was mixed in with red. She greets me with a mere kiss on the cheek and a brief conversation. She persuaded me into my dining room, which was empty with beige carpeting, white walls, and a chandelier on the ceiling. She leads me to a window where we look out into the unknown. As we stare into the forest, we notice nightfall is soon to come, and it is just past dusk. The clouds look like they are about to have a long blizzard. As we scan down the sky, I notice that there's already an inch of snow on the ground. The trees were all leafless, and they looked dead because it was that time of the season. As we just stare into the edge of our land and into the rest of the deep weald, we notice how gothically beautiful it looks. Just then, we notice a slight change in the landscape. We see deer scattering about, especially away from a certain side of the timberland. Just then, we hear a blood-curdling scream. The scream you hear when somebody is in excruciating pain and agony. It lasts for about 5 seconds and dies out. I tremble in my dream, even though it does not seem like it. I look at my mother, and she does not make a sound. We stare into the unknown. We look into the woodlot and hear the cry for help again, and it ceases after 5 seconds, then recites. Finally, she grabs my arms and takes me to my room. We sit in there and keep getting these haunting phone calls of a man screaming, "You're next, you're next." She solemnly hangs up and has a trace of fear across her face. Suddenly, the scream is much closer to my bedroom window. Suddenly, I awaken with a jolt. I feel a cold sweat run down my back and notice that my breath shows up in midair. My furry little friend is in a little ball next to me, which means it was too cold for him too. I'm too afraid to fall back into sedation, so I stay awake and stay alert to any little noise in the home. As the clock turns 6 a.m., I wake up and wander into life before dawn. Everything is dark and I can't see, so I turn on the television. I make a cup of morning tea and tremble as I drink it. As I walked out to the bus, I couldn't help hearing the screams in my head and being terrified walking down a 50-foot driveway surrounded by timber. I've had a few experiences as a child, probably being less than 8 years of age, give or take. I found some little glass thing that I liked, and I was playing with it. I don't know what I was fascinated about it with, but I was a child. I lost it, and I woke up that night to go to the bathroom, and there it was on the bathroom counter. I didn't know how it had gotten there. I walk out in the hallway to go back to bed, and I see a figure run into my room. I run into my room, looking under my closet, under my bed, and all over. I find nothing. I go into my brother's room. He's still asleep, and see nothing else. I suppose the figure was returning the object to me. Who knows? Another time, I guess I woke up my mother to get me something to drink. After we went down the stairs and turned a corner to go to the kitchen, I'm behind her, and as she is about to go to the other room, I see a little boy, probably about my age at the time, and dressed in old-style clothes. I don't know, maybe 17th or 18th century clothes, just old. I asked my mother if she just saw that, and she said, "No, Bradley. What did you see?" I told her what I had just seen, and she didn't tell me it was my imagination or anything. She believed me. She says that many people in the family have seen things from time to time like that. I've seen other things in those days. My memory is a little shady about them, but those are my two best remembered. For some reason, I was somewhat scared of what I saw. I don't know why. Maybe because they were so sudden and gone so quickly. I would only see them for about 2 or 3 seconds, and they would just disappear as quickly as they appeared. I did live across the street from a cemetery, and someone we sold something to at a garage sale said the plot of land we lived on used to be a cemetery. An old one, judging by the clothes the boy was wearing. An old girlfriend sent me a link to this site, and I thought I would check it out. I came across the link, Children and Ghosts, and I thought I would give you my thoughts after reading it. I stopped seeing these things when I guess I just got a little scared, and just said to myself, I don't want to see these things anymore. After that, I hadn't seen a thing. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. I'm not sure if I wouldn't mind seeing anything these days. I worked at a funeral home for 6 months and saw a lot of sadness and some gruesome things as well. People seem to be most upset when someone takes their own life, more so than a murder even. I got out of that because there is no money in it. It is because of those experiences that I do believe in life after death. Well, I hope I didn't make this message too long. I hope what I told you was helpful to you in some way. Well, let me first explain. I'm not psychic. I don't think that I'm particularly sensitive. I know that some of my friends and I in high school did mess around with some stuff. Ouija boards, going to cemeteries, etc. That wasn't the brightest of ideas, but it wasn't meant to be harmful. For whatever reason, I seem to attract this kind of energy. My parents had bought a house in a brand new development in West Windsor, New Jersey, in 1992. It was built on a former sod farm. Nothing too strange that we knew about. From the very beginning, I'd gotten weird vibes and sensations there. That something just wasn't right. My grandmother's sister, who was very sensitive, did not like coming over, that she never felt comfortable there. I never saw anything outright when I lived there, but I always got some strange vibes. My late grandmother did have a frightening experience. She had fallen asleep watching TV in the family room and awoke around 2 a.m. to 2 men standing in front of her. She screamed, and they were gone. I would get sensations of cold spots in certain spots in the home, especially in the front room. A lot of misery befell my family when they lived there too. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe not. In 1994, I lived for a brief time at 50 Main Street in Roebling. It was once a doctor's office, and I believe a post office at one point in time. I had many strange experiences in that home. My husband was going to school at night and worked full-time, so I was there by myself a lot. There was a room that was used for storage between our kitchen and the garage. I never wanted to be in there by myself. It was a very oppressive feeling, and I had a hard time breathing when I would be in there. There had been several times when I was doing laundry in the basement that I felt as if someone was standing behind me. Every so often I would catch a glimpse of an older, heavy-set woman outside. Since there was an alley directly behind the house, I assumed it was a neighbor. Apparently, no one alive in the neighborhood fit the description. The one thing that did me in was the 3rd floor. When my husband lived there as a teenager, he and his brother shared it, and his brother had put mirrors along one whole wall. For whatever reason, I was never able to look at those mirrors. I don't know if I was afraid of what I'd see or what, but I never could. I had originally planned on making the other room there into my sewing room. One afternoon, I was up sweeping when I felt as if someone was in the room with me. I knew I was home alone. It was such a palatable presence. I started to pray out loud. I basically did the rosary, but the feeling did not subside. I did not feel evil. It was just very oppressive. Needless to say, I was grateful when my mother-in-law sold the home and we had to move. As an aside, I grew up in Ridgewood, Bergen County, and I think that it is a one haunted town. There is something very evil in the cemetery across from Ben Franklin Jr., and I knew people would mess around with that stuff that they should have not stirred something up there. One night, we were all hanging out across the street by Ben Franklin Jr., and then I went home. I parked in my parents' garage. I was 17 or 18 at the time, and for some strange reason, the car backed itself out of the garage and landed directly over a ditch. It was like it had perfectly aligned itself to go there. The high school is haunted too. There used to be a room off the auditorium in the tower that was always 10 degrees cooler than anywhere else in the school. Of course, this is where we would go to smoke on a rainy day. There would just be a strange feeling in there. I don't know of any stories behind the building. It just might be a natural energy field or something. Finally, I used to work at the Borders in West Windsor. The shopping center that the store is located in was built over swampland where a bunch of kids from Trenton had drowned on Christmas night when they were fleeing police in a stolen car. The accident happened around 10 p.m. at night. Apparently where the back room in the store is was not too far away from the accident where it happened. There were many times we would hear things outside at night on the loading dock. Of course, when we would open the door, there would be nothing. A lot of times, and especially after 10 p.m., it would be very creepy going back there. I know that some other employees said that they had seen things back there. I never saw anything. I just got weird feelings. I've never really shared any of these stories with anyone before, but I feel like you guys won't do anything to exploit them or make fun of me. When I was 15 years old, I used to frequently babysit from a next-door neighbor who has 5 children. It was a Friday night at about 10 p.m. I had just put the children to sleep in their bedrooms upstairs. I stayed up for a while watching a few late-night shows. At about midnight, I found myself restless and decided to wash the dishes from that evening's dinner. About 10 minutes into washing, I heard footsteps behind me. Without turning around, I said, "You're supposed to be sleeping." I received no response and turned slightly to my right, and out of the corner of my eye, I seen the outline of a little boy with dark hair, dressed in a t-shirt and shorts, and white tennis shoes. I turned back to the dishes and was about to repeat myself when the hair on the back of my neck started to go up and a shiver went down my back. I quickly realized that the little boy I'd just seen was not one of the children. I turned completely about to find nobody there. I quickly walked through the kitchen to the living room and up the stairs, where I found all the children sleeping soundly in their beds. There is no way that any of the children could have ran back up the stairs and back into their beds within 5 seconds, and also without me hearing anything. My proof of what I had seen was real, is that all of the children were wearing pajamas, and not one of them had on shorts. Well, this didn't exactly happen to me, but it happened to my grandmother and her mother in the 40s in Brazil. My grandmother was young, and she had just bought her first house with my grandfather, and she had 2 little daughters. My aunts, obviously. My father wasn't even born yet. My grandmother isn't a person to lie, so this story is no bull. Well, it was around 1945, and my grandmother was preparing food in the kitchen for my aunts. My grandfather was at work, so she was alone with her 2 daughters. She heard footsteps coming down the living room and down the hall. She thought that was strange, because my grandfather wouldn't come home. Only 5 hours later, she went to greet him, but instead was greeted by a terrible cold gust of wind. She shrugged it off and went on with her life. But until the next day, she was cooking for my 2 aunts. My oldest aunt was around 5, and the second was around 2. She heard the same footsteps, and she noticed that it was always at the end of her mother's room. My great-grandmother would sleep there sometimes. She grabbed her 2 daughters and waited outside for my grandfather to come. This would always happen at lunchtime, around 12 p.m. Well, my grandfather was always skeptical when it came to ghosts, so he comforted her and told her he was hearing things. She believed him and went on. The next day, my great-grandfather went to sleep there. She would sleep there to help out my grandmother with the girls, and the footsteps still came. But my grandmother felt safe because she was with her mother and 2 daughters, so she didn't mind it. At night, my great-grandmother was sleeping, and she felt the bed go down as if someone was sitting down on it. Then, she felt a hand caressing her face. She got the heck out of there and never returned to that house. They lived there for 2 years. Soon after my father was born, they moved. So that's my story. I do not believe she was lying, because she isn't a person to lie about that. Thank you. About 4 years ago, my parents moved to a home in Minapur. We knew nothing about the home's past. But right after they moved in, strange things began to happen. These odd things were only noticed by my mother and my nephew. My stepfather never saw or heard anything strange, and my mother was afraid to tell him, for fear that he would put the house up for sale immediately. Mom would notice that the knickknacks in her china cabinet would be missing. They would show up again in the china cabinet, in a different spot. One day she was coming downstairs and could hear the television on. She thought to herself, that darn kid left the TV on. And as she rounded the corner, it clicked off by itself. She was vacuuming one day and turned the vacuum off, but it kept going on for about 30 seconds. basement had motion detectors that would go blip blip when they detected motion. These were going off so often that eventually you didn't even hear from them anymore. Mom would often feel presence watching her when she was downstairs doing laundry. The home had strange things in it, such as holes in the walls that had been plastered up. One closet had the back of it plastered up, and I used to tease her that maybe a body was back there. My nephew, who lives with my parents, used to complain, not be scared, but just complain that there was someone in the room with him. They lived in this house for about 2 years. When I was 16, a long time ago, I went to visit friends who lived in Medicine Hat, Alberta, Canada. I was to stay with them for 1 week. My first night there, they showed me the guest room in the basement. I was not a jumpy kid, but was uneasy about the accommodations. Once in the basement, you had to cross all the way across the other end, turn down the hallway, and the bedroom was down that hall, with a bathroom directly across from it. My first night there, I tried to convince the dog to come downstairs and sleep with me. He would have none of that. I resorted to carrying the poor creature downstairs, but once we got down there, he bolted back upstairs. It didn't help that the walls were covered in animal heads, deer, elk, etc. This was, and still is, absolutely horrifying to me. More horrifying, in fact, than meeting a ghost face to face. Anyhow, I slept down there the first night without incident. A day or two later, I went into the laundry room, which was also in the basement. Hanging behind the door was the creepiest little puppet. It was actually a marionette that I have ever seen. Now, I'm not going to say this for the sake of dramatics. This hideous thing would be swinging back and forth every time I went into the laundry room. It would stop swinging when it was facing me. If I went into the laundry room with anyone else, it was completely still and usually facing the wall. I could not and still can't figure that one out. Anyhow, one night I decided to take the dog for a walk. Actually, I was sneaking out to smoke a cigarette, and out I went. I was gone for 1 or 2 hours, and when I returned home, the house was dark. Someone was showering in the upstairs bathroom, but the kids were in bed. I decided to go downstairs and get ready for bed. The lights were off. I turned them on and went downstairs to my room. As I headed into my room, I noticed that the bathroom across the hall had a light on, and the door was shut closed. I didn't think anything about it, but walked into the room and took my nightgown, toothbrush, etc. out of the suitcase. I turned around, and the door to the bathroom stood wide open. The light was off. I thought to myself, geez, I must be in trouble, but carried on getting ready for bed. I eventually made my way upstairs to face the music. My host was still in the bathroom, and I sat in the upstairs living room waiting for him. He eventually came out of the bathroom and came and sat with me. I asked if Darlene was mad at me or something. His reply was that Darlene went to Calgary tonight. They had made an offer on a truck that was for sale, and it was accepted. Darlene had been gone for hours. He could sense that I was puzzled and asked me why. I simply explained what happened downstairs. One thing that always troubled me is the very matter of fact that he stated to me it must have been the wind, and got up and left me sitting there. How could the wind just turn on and off and open a door? I slept on the couch upstairs for the remainder of my trip. In Conway, South Carolina. I lived on Cates Bay Road. You could tell the house out from all the other ones because it was the only one on a dirt road, and all the other houses were by the highway. We lived with my grandma, so the house was pretty old. Her parents and her parents' parents also lived in it, and so on. All in all, the house has been through 13 generations. The house was also built on top of slave headquarters. Whoever built the house thought it would be charming to leave some of the quarters still standing. My grandma always told me that the house was haunted, and I didn't even believe her until one night when a date was dropping me off, and we sat in the driveway for a little while. We got quiet, and all of a sudden we heard a white male voice say, "Get back to work." Then we heard a whispering sound, and a dish or glass break. I then told my date goodnight, and ran inside. When I got there, I saw that it was only my grandma in the home. Of course, I knew my dad would never behave like that. All Grandma did was look at me and say, "I told you it was true." My grandma told me that my mom used to lay in bed and listen to an African American woman sing hymn. Grandma said it was never frightening to her until she found out that there was no African American woman living, or any woman who sung like that for that matter, in the neighborhood. The kitchen to the quarters must have been my grandma's room, because it has a very distinct smell of something haunted. The house almost caught fire one day. Mom was cooking peas on the stove and put it on low. She was gone for about 5 minutes, and when she came back, the knob had been turned high, and the pot was on fire. When Grandma died, we moved out of the house and out of Conway. Too many strange things for us to handle. Clay, Alabama is a fairly new town. Most of it was farming land, and nothing but swamps before the new middle school and high school went in, about anywhere from 9 to 12 years ago. Things haven't been the same since in the new high school. It is reported that the lockers open and slam by themselves, and you don't want to be out in Clay at night. You may see that Indians used to live there before the land was bought and sold off piece by piece. In the middle of the night, sometimes you could hear strange noises outside your houses, and the dogs and other animals in the area will act out for no reason at all. Is this the work of a ghost? No real investigation has been done there, but for us who live there, we know the truth. We all know that Clay is indeed a haunted town. That is not the most haunted place, though. I live in the middle-sized town of Grayson Valley, and I've personally had enough experiences to tell you that I personally believe that my house is haunted. My first experience came when I was about 7 or 8 years of age. I remember it was a school night, and I just laid down to bed. I don't even remember much about it, but I remember the room becoming very cold, and it felt as if someone sat down on the end of my bed. I laid there scared to move at first, but when I looked up, there was no one there. Ever since then, things have been weird. At first, I shrugged off that experience and told myself it wasn't true. Boy, was I wrong. It happened again when I was about 10 years or so. I was helping my mom carry in some groceries, and as I approached the top of the stairs, I swore I heard the sound of children laughing. I immediately shrugged it off and told myself that I imagined it, but my next encounter would leave me speechless. When I was 13, my grandmother, who I was very close to, passed away. Right after she passed, things seemed different. At first, it was little things, like throwing things down and then coming back in later to find that they were gone. and it's somehow been put in the right places, in small things like that. But then something out of the ordinary happened. One night, about 2 or 3 days after my grandmother's funeral, I was lying in bed when I happened to notice something shining on the wall. I noticed that it was about the size of a small tomato, and it was a very beautiful blue color. I don't think anything about it, because I figured that it must have been the moonlight shining off of something. But it kept coming back. Night after night it would appear, and always in the general area over my door, just slightly over my wall. Then one night, I got up to see where the light was coming from. I couldn't find a source anywhere. The way the moonlight was shining, it couldn't have been that. And there was nothing in sight for it to shine off of or anything like that. I was totally freaked out, but by the next night it was gone, and I never saw it again. The last great encounter I had was this past summer. I was about 14, and on my way to 15. I had remembered I had just gotten home from school and was doing my chores, which included vacuuming the living room. There was this black fan that was sitting on the floor and was plunged into the wall. I had to unplug it to unplug the vacuum in. The other square plug was being used by a lamp. I began to vacuum. Shortly after I turned around to unplug the vacuum, I noticed that the lamp was unplugged and the black fan had been plugged in and was running on high. I was absolutely terrified. I ran in my room and shut my door and didn't come out till my dad came home. I'm an only child, and no one else was in the house with me when the event occurred, which places no one there who could have plugged the fan in, other than a ghost. I have since had other experiences that involve strange noises or talking that sounds distant. Sometimes, though, I wonder if there's something more in my house than just me. I don't know much about the history of my house or the property for which it sits on. I only know that before us, my house had 2 previous owners. First, a young couple with 3 children, and when she got pregnant again, they had to move. And after them, an older couple moved in. Then after that, we moved in. The house is only about 20 to 30 years old. I know that much, but unfortunately that is all I know at the given time. Maybe my experiences have something to do with my lost family, or maybe that of the previous family who lived there, or maybe I have so many experiences. Because in my family, we have a history of producing mediums and prophets, or people who can sometimes see into the future, without any control over how to do it, or when it is going to happen, or sometimes things just come to them. Anyhow, this is my story of Clay, Alabama, and of my possibly haunted house. I hope you will enjoy reading it, and can offer maybe some tips about why these ghosts might be there, or whatever it is inside my house. I have to tell you, when I was young, my parents rented a house in Monmouth, Oregon. I was so happy. We walked all over downstairs. It was cool and I liked it. And like I said, it was an enjoyable experience. Then I took the first flight of stairs. The stairs turned right. They went upright. There was a room there. I felt nothing. Then I went forward. When I walked into the room, I felt a horrible, icky feeling. It was terrible. It was dark. My parents did not know what I felt. I did not tell them. It was just icky and dark. In that room, I had a walk-in closet. I felt so much like there was a woman in that closet. I could not ever go in that closet or place any clothing in there. I got in trouble for not hanging up my clothes, but I knew that there was someone in there. I got in trouble for crawling out the window in that room. They said that they saw a woman jumping out of the window of my room. I swear I never did that. I slept my whole life downstairs that we lived there on the couch. The couch was directly under that room. I had the icky feeling that there was a woman walking up above me. I ran away. They brought me back. When I was 17, my dad told me to go in the backyard and turn off the water on the yard. I did, and when I looked up in the window, there was a woman standing in the window. Forever. I looked at her for 10 minutes, or at least it felt like that. I will tell you that there was a woman standing here that looks like you and I do. I wanted to make sure it was not the moon or some weird thing, but I will tell you for a fact, there is someone that lives in that house. I know it is a pub now. I went there. When I started to tell them of my story, they said they knew. They said everyone who ever lived there knows there's a woman who lives upstairs. I swear it is a bad woman. I can tell you more if you want it. I don't know if you still need stories or are updating the site anymore, but here's what happened to me as I can remember it. I was watching TV late at night one summer in my room. All of the lights were off. The only thing that was turned on was the TV. I was watching a show on tape, and I'd paused the tape. Something caught my attention out of the corner of my eye. I looked, and for a couple of seconds, these pair of eyes were staring at me from underneath my dresser. They were these two red glowing eyes looking directly at me. I was only a couple feet away from the dresser at the time, and I was lying on my bed. Whatever it was had disappeared after only a couple of seconds of looking at it. I quickly turned on the lights, thinking that it might have been an animal, but I did not see anything. There was no way for some animal to get inside my room from the outside. There weren't any open doors or windows for an animal to somehow crawl in. I stayed up for months after that, afraid I would see the thing again. But I never did. I was completely shocked when I looked at it that one night. I wasn't afraid though. I know this because I can still see the image in my mind of what I saw. My family and I lived in this house on Marriott Street in Bridgeport, Connecticut. We were never really sure how many ghosts we had in our house. And before I was born, my parents used to have family get-togethers, birthday parties in our basement that my parents had so beautifully redone. They used to be down in the basement with their guests. When they hear about what sounded like someone running upstairs, when my dad used to go downstairs to look, he used to never find anyone there. Then we have this plastic pitcher with a closed and open top. Well, when we used to go and grab it to pour ourselves more water, the top would pop off. Then we would put it down. The top would close. Not only the ghost affected everyone in my family, but it affected my brother and I the most. The ghost or ghosts hated my little brother and would bother him in the night saying they were going to kill him. The ghosts loved me. They really didn't love my brother though. Although sometimes when I was in the basement playing video games, I could feel them sitting next to me. Now, I love hauntings and ghosts, but after we sold our house and moved to Wilmington, North Carolina, the ghosts seemed to follow. Even today, I knew that they were there, because sometimes when I look up, I can see a dark figure go over me, or past me, and I know they're there. One night my brother and I were watching a movie in our room. and a little boy's voice and a little girl's voice could easily be heard in the hallway behind my door. My parents were asleep, and on the other side of the home, our TV was the only thing on, and when we paused it, we could still hear them. My friend used to live in Mississippi. They had to move to another house due to the rodent infestations in their old house. My friend was about 4 at the time, but she remembers some of the instances. But her mom told me some too. About a week after they were settled in, my friend would wake up in the middle of the night. When her parents came to investigate, my friend told them that she dreamed that all her toys were burning in the toy chest. Her parents showed her that they were not, and they went back to sleep. One night, her mom was watching TV alone on the couch, late one night, and there was nobody around. She heard someone say the F word, and it sounded like a lady behind her. She turned around quickly, and nobody was there. My friend also had dreams of a black dog burning beneath their bed. TVs and lights turn on and off by themselves. After a month, they asked neighbors if they knew the history of the home. One old couple told them that 30 years earlier, there was a young couple who had just gotten married who lived there. The young bride was ironing an outfit for a party in the living room and had starched a lover. Her husband was leaving the house for a minute to go pick up something from the store, and he flicked a cigarette, and the starch caught fire. It was all over her. He tried to help her put it out, but they died, and the back of the house burned down, and the dog was killed also. Needless to say, they moved out right away. Hey guys, so first of all, likes, comments, and subscribe if you're new are always appreciated. I hope you sincerely enjoyed the compilation. And now, we are trying to upload on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8 p.m. every week from now on. At least I'll try, I don't know what my voice is going to do. As you guys are aware, and if you guys are new, I've been having voice issues for the past, I want to say year or so. Laryngitis that kept coming back, and it was not fun, but I'm happy to say that it's coming back. I'm healthy, I feel good, and yeah, let's rock and roll. If you guys got to the end of this video, I want you to write, poop. Yeah, let's just go with poop again, because that's the only thing that I know what I don't like poop. I promise you guys, poop is just poop. But if you guys like poop, I'm not going to judge you. We're all, rational human beings here. I personally think that having a healthy set of bowels is absolute bliss. And even being scared gave me his blessing to poop as much as I wanted, as long as I was healthy. So, guys... leave me. I'm happy my voice is back. Let's just leave it at that. I'm sorry. I love you guys though. See you in the next video.